Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. The logicians put one interesting question. You say Brahman is real and the forms and names are unreal. How do we get the knowledge of the unreal by having a knowledge of the real? You say realize Brahman, realize Brahman. By realizing it, how do we get to know the knowledge about forms and names? That's his question. Vedanta answers it in a very strong yet simplistic way. It says, take the case of a pot. It has two aspects, the mud, which is the cause, and the pot, which is the effect. And what is this effect? Nothing but cause, assuming a form or name. Because it is the same mud which becomes a pot, which appears like a pot. Therefore, Vedanta says, if you acquire the knowledge about the real, then wisdom will automatically dawn about the unreal. There is no need to put a separate effort or a second time effort to know the unreal. Because Brahman manifests in various forms and names. So realize Brahman, you will know all these forms and names are illusion. This is the basis, since it is the cause which is appearing as the effect. And cites an illustration. For a toy maker, he makes beautiful toys out of mud, an elephant, a lion, a peacock, etc. For the toy maker, he always knows for sure that all this is nothing but clay or mud. Whereas for a child who is interested in acquiring it, he or she believes one to be elephant, one to be peacock, and the other one to be lion. This is the difference between a realized soul and an ignorant person, says Vedanta. One who believes something is born new, things will change, and looks everything purely from a worldly perspective, will commit the same mistake which this child is committing with the various toys made out of mud. Therefore, Vedanta says do two things. Focus on the real. You don't have to do anything else. If you focus on the real, and if you are able to realize what is reality, then unreality or illusion will straight away wither. How do we say that? For somebody who has a thorough knowledge on clay or mud, will also have the knowledge that out of this clay or mud, one can make any number of forms and shapes. Likewise, if one who realizes what Brahman is will acquire the knowledge that everything appearing in this universe, starting from Akasha to the body, is nothing but forms and names, manifestations out of the power of Maya. Three stages are important, says Vedanta. Before creation, it looks unmanifest. Upon manifestation, it attains names and forms. And this happens between unmanifest and manifest. The activity that happens is the potency of Brahman, which is Maya, starts acting. And therefore, Vedanta wants us to assimilate one truth and view life from that perspective. Whatever you see, whatever you hear, whatever you experience, know Maya as the root cause on the owner of the Maya to be the great Lord. If this conception goes into our mind, then doubts will never occur to us. And says, let's take the case of Akasha, because it is the first evolute from Brahman. We will see three things about it. It shines, it is very dear, and it has a form called space. And Vedanta says, of the three, the first two are real because they are attributes of Brahman, whereas space is an attribute of Maya. And they give this reason. How do you say space is Maya? How can we think of a life without space? That's the question logicians put, for which Vedanta puts back a question, counter question. All right, when you go into deep sleep and when you actually experience the Brahmanhood in deep sleep because of the Anandamaya Kosha, please tell us, are you able to cognize space there? That's the question. We don't cognize space in deep sleep. Therefore, for a realized soul, space is also an illusion as it conquers, because Brahman conquers even space. It is an evolute or a manifestation of Brahman out of the power of Maya. This is the answer. You don't feel space during deep sleep. You will not feel space once you are realized. Therefore, Vedanta says, one who believes nothing existed before manifestation and nothing would exist upon dissolution will also come to the inevitable conclusion what exists in the interregnum as manifestations are nothing but illusions. Beings have their origin in the unmanifest, have their middle stage manifest, and also have their end also into the unmanifest. Therefore, this becomes the basis for Vedanta to say, concentrate only on the Brahman. Like Akasha, it gives now, when every evolute, you can test it. Space, we have given an answer. So, for every evolute, there is a power. For example, Vayu has touch and form, Agni has heat and light, water has fluidity, and earth has hardness. Understand this as Maya, understand this as illusion. Then there is no difficulty in handling or negotiating them. In everything, in all the creations of names and forms, manifestation of names and forms, you are bound to see a being shining and something very dear to it. Even an animal, when chased, runs for life. A plant about to be destroyed runs for life, begs for life. So it all happens. Everything is dear to themselves. These three things, even in the forms, therefore realize it as Brahman. These three, being, shining, and being dear, is inherent. And this section, Acharya closes it with a very interesting parable for us to understand. There is an ocean. Waves get created over the ocean, and foam also forms part over the waves. As jivas, we are able to identify this is ocean, that is a wave, and that's a foam. We are able to cognize everything separately, identify them separately with name and form. But ask one question, is what Vedanta says. Can the foam exist without the waves? Can the waves exist without the ocean? So they are distinct as we think, but they all have an origin on, therefore, one who concentrates on the ocean will know waves and foams are nothing part of it. And the potential strength of Maya alone seeks to manifest. This section is concluded with the following verses. When the full Brahman of the nature of existence, consciousness, and bliss is perceived, the perceiver automatically ignores names and forms. 2. As you keep progressing more and more towards Brahman, you will start showing insignificant attachment or bondage that will start with names and forms, and that will start keep declining. And one day or the other, we will reach the crescendo where we will reach the state of experience of the formless, and forms and names will simply vanish from our life stream. There's one more last section in chapter 13. We'll complete it tomorrow. Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Chapter 13 concludes with the following guidelines. Vedanta wants to take the example of our dreams and puts forth an interesting question. See, a human being is able to be in a waking state, then in a dream state, and in a deep sleep state. How is this possible? But for a magical power, you are awake and you are in deep sleep. Therefore, it says, take dream. The kind of dreams that occur to us and the multiplicity of dreams that happens to us. Every time something emerges and then it sinks. And absolutely there is no order. Do the dreams come based on any systematic formatting? They are orderless. They come in plenty and we do not know how it comes. We have no control over it to stop it. When a human mind, a jiva's mind is capable of generating this, Vedanta puts a question, is not Maya, the potent power of Brahman, bring out any number of permutation it wants in this universe? When you see dream and when you wake up, you realize it's just a dream. The fantasies, the illusions, the impossibilities, one cutting his own head, one flying in the sky, and then a dead father is coming alive. You can multiply it in any number of ways. Therefore, Vedanta says this is something which we need to factor in our mind, saying that if this is possible in dreams, why not Maya do it over the universe? And therefore guides us to ignore names and forms, because they are all finally manifestation of illusions. It gives one more example. We jump into a river and swim deeply. Our body is capable of being in an inverted posture for a while in the water. But when we come out, do we attempt to do it that way? When we come out of the river and stand on the bank, we know for sure it's not possible. So some power when you are inside the water, you are not able to do it when you are on the bank. Therefore, it says these things should be understood and perceived in mind. Thirdly, puts a very interesting dimension again. Every second, mind creates millions and millions of things. And every second they get destroyed. Either out of exhaustion, or out of misery, or out of indifference. May it be anything. Every jiva and the mind of a jiva keeps multiplying. So, Vedanta says it's your mind which is the power through which you create this universe, superimpose forms and names. And remember, whenever you superimpose, every second you are imposing and destroying it. For the reason, and you see, this happens every second. You extend it to a month, you extend it to a year, you extend it to your whole life. Boyhood once goes, will it come back? Youth once lost, can it be regained back? Somebody dies, can they come alive? Yesterday, time is lost through yesterday. Time lost, can it come back? So it is transient. That's the message, concluding message in chapter 13. What we consider as continuous is actually not continuous. It keeps changing, destroying its earlier form and name. And this happens without a break, continuously. And therefore, it says if we start perceiving from this angle, the mind will slowly and steadily become strong and make you feel, why don't we give this up at some point of time? Understanding the world as unreal from its transient point helps you to slowly ignore, and the mind will want to give it up. And it says, therefore, you will start acting like an actor. There are three phases to it. First, understand it is transient and we are making and breaking every second through our illusions. Two, a constant thought on this will enable us to slowly wriggle out of this cyclic process. We'll feel the pressure at that point of time. And thirdly, as we pursue the path, we will become a solid rock. When there is a waterfall falling on a solid rock, it doesn't affect the rock in any way. In a blacksmith's foundry, anything can be bent and shaped, but not the anvil upon which all these items are placed. So it will make us slowly realize Brahman is such a solid rock and Brahman is such an anvil in a foundry. Chapter 13 concludes with this example. How do we perceive this universe and its beauty? There's one way, a reflecting mirror. Suppose there are mirrors reflecting in all directions. All of us will be able to view everything through that mirror. Now, Vedanta says you have a choice. You keep seeing all the things projected through the mirror. You will find them very fascinating and very attractive, but they are all illusions. On the other hand, if your mind is firm enough to view only the mirror, by default, you will start ignoring the things appearing in the mirror. So, but for the mirror, reflection is not possible. And once it is reflected, you have an option to see the reflected things or at the mirror. And if you choose to see the mirror, then you will start overlooking the material objects that is appearing in the mirror. But what do we do? Vedanta says, fascinated as we are with the names and forms which make up the universe, we forget the existence of Brahman, though we are actually seeing it every moment. We forget that but for Brahman, which is existence, consciousness and bliss, the universe can neither exist nor shine or be attractive to us. We simply overlook. As we see the impact of Maya every second, it also provides us the window to see Brahman every second. And the shifting of gears should happen slowly. That's the recommendation of the guidance. And it therefore says, to conclude in chapter 13, thinking only of it, talking only of it, mutually instructing only about it, concentrating only upon it, should be the nature of practice over a period of time. If this is practice and it says, what is the reward? What you start just like observing very slowly and mature to this progress, a sustained practice for a long time without interruption is capable of destroying all our vasanas accumulated through several births. This is the power once we start looking into Brahman and start concentration. With this, we come to the closure of chapter 13. Let's start chapter 14 tomorrow. Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Through chapter 11, we saw bliss of Brahman by concentration and bliss of Brahman by the analysis of self by chapter 12 and the contemplation of the unreal nature of the duality in chapter 13. Now, chapter 14 describes the bliss that is enjoyed by one who has realized the self but has not completely merged in it and is still able to relish the resultant bliss as if it were an object of enjoyment. Chapter 14 deals with bliss of knowledge. Acharya classifies this bliss of knowledge into 4 categories. 1. The absence of sorrow. 2. On obtaining the desires. 3. The feeling I have done what all has to be done. And 4. The feeling I have obtained what has to be obtained. So let's see in today's discussion the first 2 kinds of the 4: absence of sorrow and the obtaining of desire. Sorrow, according to Vedanta, is classified into 2. That one which is produced in this world and the one produced in the other world. They are again, the Atma is classified into 2 as Jiva, the individual soul, and the Supreme Self or the changeless Self. When consciousness becomes identified with the 3 bodies, gross, subtle and causal, all of us know it becomes Jiva and becomes one in the nature of an experiencer. The Supreme Self, which is existence, consciousness and blissful, if it starts identifying through these bodies names and forms, then those become objects to be experienced. And Vedanta says, if you can ignore the experiencer and the experience, the net result is the residue that is left out is nothing but pure self. And it repeats again, sorrow is only for the 3 bodies, the gross body, the subtle body and the causal body. And says, what type of worry, what type of a sorrow does it grip over each of the bodies? Diseases or the worries over the gross body. Emotions like desire, anger, hatred, jealousy, happiness, these are all emotions which affect the subtle body. And the causal body becomes the source seed for both the gross body and also the subtle body. Therefore, the objective of Vedanta is ignore the names and forms and you will finally land up in the self. When it comes to the pleasures, we said there are two types of pleasures in the world is all what we classify through the bodies and through the names and forms. What about the pleasures in the other world? That is something to be a concern or a sorrow or a worry about virtues and sins in relation to the other world. This will become the basis for us to be worried about the future worlds when this body falls down one day. Therefore, one who gets over this sorrow through the bliss of knowledge attains perfection. And it cites a few examples. 1. Just as water does not adhere to the lotus leaf, so is there in the absence of adherence by the actions that may be done in future, one's bliss of knowledge arises in oneself. 2. Once there is knowledge, it's like the Ishika grass getting burnt instantaneously in fire. Knowledge burns everything. 3. It's like a blazing fire which reduces the fuel to ashes. So does the fire of knowledge reduce everything into ashes. And 4. Getting over worry is what ultimately is. As long as the sense of I and the intellect being tainted is present, body, all the three bodies will be a source for worries. So the attempt is to only remove the sense of I and ensure the intellect is no longer tainted. Coming to the second portion of obtaining desires. What do you mean by that? Vedanta says one who gets fulfillment out of desires, contentment out of desires, is also a way to progress in spiritual life. Desire is of two types. It's like pouring ghee into the fire, keeps accelerating. Mindless acceleration is one way. But if somebody gets tripti, contentment over a period of time, then once there is contentment in a human mind, it says that's a sign towards spiritual progress. Because once there is contentment and if it becomes steady in a human thought and in a human action, whatever pleasures that come and go, it will be enjoyed as prarabdha or as karma, not with a desire or intent from the mind to somehow enjoy it. That's the difference which Vedanta tries to bring it up very clearly and says, imagine this can happen to a king as well as to one who has attained Brahman, and gives exactly this description or a portrayal of a king who can be on the path of self-realization, young, handsome, learned, healthy, strong-minded, with an army and ruling over the entire earth full of wealth, fully endowed with all the human pleasures and happiness which is so contenting, which makes him feel so contented. The king slowly starts to journey towards Brahman. And logicians immediately ask a question. In the case of a king, we can understand. He enjoys. Whereas for a Brahmajnani, for an Atmajnani, for a realized soul, what is that he enjoys? For you to say he gets over in obtaining the desire, for which Acharya concludes this second segment, obtaining desires, this way. There is no desire for enjoyment, both in the case of a king and also in the case of a jnani, because they don't approach anything with an idea of enjoyment. So absence of desire is common. Now, the absence of desire in the case of a king comes out of contentment and because of the enjoyment. Whereas the absence of desire comes to a knower of Brahman, or a person who obtains that knowledge by sheer discrimination. This is the distinction. Both ultimately reach the same destination. Let's see the other two tomorrow.